Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this lecture, Computational Museology, Heritage and Digital Museum, part of the training program of Archive Online Academy. This lecture will be introduced by Sarah Kenderdine, and I'm Irene Vigolin, and I work for Fondazione Giorgio Roccini at the Archive Center, born in 2018. Thanks to the collaboration between Fondazione Giorgio Roccini, Factum Foundation, and École Polytechnique Fédérale de Louisiane, EPFL. Archive stands for Analysis and Recording of Cultural Heritage in Venice. And every year we organize Archive Online Academy, a public training program created in 2020 that includes lectures, courses and workshops dedicated to digital preservation and enhancement of cultural heritage and digital humanities in general. I would like to remind everyone that your questions are very welcome and that you can type them in the chat or you can raise your hand to talk at the end of the lecturer's speech. There will be time and space for questions and answers. Thank you again, everyone, to be here. And before the lesson is going to start, I want to introduce you the lecturer, Sarah Kenderdine. She is a researcher on the interactive and immersive experience for galleries, libraries, and archives and museums. And in 2017, she was an appointed professor at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Louisiane, EPFL. And she is also director and lead the curator of EPFL Pavilion that I think she's gonna talk about later. And I think that's all. I want to now leave the floor to Sarah Kenderdine. Thank you for being here, and I'm going to leave the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Irina. So I'm going to share my screen to get this going nicely, and does this do share? Okay. So at the moment you should see a black slide, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So it's a great pleasure to be able to do this lecture for the Cini Foundation Archive, and my thanks to the director, Chiara, and her collaborators, and Irene, and the many people that work there. And I'd also like to acknowledge the generous support of Lady Helen Hamlin Foundation and the other founding members of Archive. The theme is computational museology, cultural heritage, and the digital museum. So I'm using this terminology of computational museology to provide a scaffold that unites machine intelligence with data curation, ontology with visualization, and communities of publics and practitioners with embodied interaction through immersive interfaces. And computational museology is really a framework that empowers cultural organizations to link all forms of culture and materialities, objects, knowledge systems, representation, and participation. To imagine setting the scene for a new kind of digital museology, one where the visitor is at the core of the experience, we could step back in time. So it was the former CEO of Intel, Brian Krasnick, who declared as early as 2014, we're no longer in the midst of a transformation from a world of screens and devices to a world of immersive experiences. However, media art history and media archaeology informs us that what he was really observing with these prosthetic architectures of the senses, from the Kaiser panorama to the sensorama. The emergence of immersive environments coincided with the sublimation of curatorial praxis inside machines and represented the greatest challenge to the passive viewer since the invention of the roller coaster. So for 25 years or so, I've been designing interactive frameworks for public engagement with cultural heritage, initially located at Museum Victoria, where we started to build these large-scale systems for mass public. Then I started to work with universities to help sustain this kind of research at the forefront of computer graphics, but working from the museum in collaboration with the university. I co-established with Professor Jeffrey Shaw, the media artist, the Applied Laboratory for Interactive Visualization and Embodiment at the Science Park in Hong Kong. I returned to Australia to build the Expanded Perception and Interaction Center, also at UNSW. So now you know what you're looking at. On the right-hand side of the screen is a small 7-meter diameter panorama. It's comprised of 56 projectors. It has a 29 computer cluster. It's 120 million pixels in 3D. So it's 60 times the resolution of a head-mounted display, you know, the goggles. So it's extremely powerful visualization tool, but it was designed to solve complexity and big data for the humanities and the sciences through visualization frameworks. Our partner lab in Hong Kong, the VRC, has just completed the world's first 360-degree 3D LED system. And then at the laboratory here in Switzerland, we have about 12 large-scale systems that offer us strategies for multi-sensory engagement, emphasizing human-to-human as well as human-to-machine interaction, giving us powerful ways to reformulate narrative in the digital context. So as mentioned, I'm also the director of EPFL Pavilions. This is a nice Kengo Kumar building on the campus. It's an amplifier for art and science in society. And in participation with diverse communities, the Pavilions blends experimental curatorship and contemporary aesthetics with open science, digital humanism, and emerging technologies. And I'll only speak about one of these exhibitions. There are many things to say about what we are doing here. But during the course of my speech, I'll focus on one of them. But just to give you a quick insight, these are more recent shows: Nature of Robotics and Expanded Fields, Deep Fakes, Art in its Double, which is the one we will discuss, Cosmos Archaeology, Explorations in Time and Space, Lighten Up on Biology and Time, and the current show, Cyber-Physical Architecture in Real Time. So currently these group of shows are touring in 9 museums worldwide. So let's return to that's a preamble, the topic at hand today, which covers these main themes. Some of them are completed projects, some of them are work in progress, so that you can see the whole complex, a seemingly eclectic array of themes there: computational archives, cultural imaginaries, heritage at risk, digital twins and deep fakes, augmented worlds, deep maps, embodied knowledge systems, and then we'll end on the voice of the visitor as a kind of evaluative framework for this. So it's a bit of an enormous preamble, but we'll deal with computational archives first. And we know in a world where tools for searching archives, this is the world we live in, are really rooted in archival conventions of grammatocentrism, where expert knowledge is the key access to entry. It's all text-based engagements to extract information. So this creates a huge barrier related to this expert knowledge. And the computational revolution really offers us a paradigm shift where archives can become a new terrain upon which curators will reckon with heritage materiality and calculate and define new fine-grained archival ontologies and narratives. And there's much more that can be said about this issue, but I'll step you through a few projects so that you know what I'm talking about. So we'll step back in time to a project by iCinema Center T-Visionarium in 2008. So it's 24 hours of free-to-air broadcast TV from 5 channels. It's taken offline. These sequences are analyzed by camera angle change, and a cut is made in the movie sequence. So in total, we end up with a database of 24,000 clips. They're about 4 seconds each. And of course, that process of doing this means that there's almost no metadata attached to any of these images. So we hired 4 nice guys, and they sat in a dark room, and they hand tagged each one of these 4-second clips with idiosyncratic metadata, emotion, expression, physicality, speed, scene structure, meta tags for gender and color, and so on. So it's a very subjective tagging process. In fact, you could profile the taggers by how they would describe love or joy and whatever. It's also true that even in our contemporary age, it's not that easy for vector extraction to analyze many of these parameters. So it's a very manually driven subjective tagging process. We stream 500 simultaneous streams of video to the 360-degree system. There's about 30 people in space, but we took them out for the purpose of this video. We just have one interactor, and he clicks on any image, it goes into the database, and it brings everything that's semantically most similar to one side and everything that's most dissimilar is behind you. He can bring up this interface and start to weight his search. So remember, this is a very old project now. He will choose color just for the purposes of demonstration. And this triggers, once clicking the fiery red stuff, the luminosity tag, so it is a computer vision tag, and it brings everything that's high luminosity to one side and everything that's low luminosity behind you. What's low luminosity is to do with the credit and the title of the movie. So it's completely different narrative or trans narrative. We like to talk about aesthetic transcription and pan aesthetics when we talk about works. You can also add clips together. So you're recombining the narratives from different movies, a recombinatory narrative experience, kind of like mashup culture, save and play. So you re-edit different narrative sequences to be your own bit.
Yeah, and they're asking me exact same question.
Been applied to a number of other film archives, the exact paradigm. So it's quite a versatile framework for dealing with large-scale moving image archive. So one of the other challenges, and I'll just stop this movie, I hope, before I get started. Okay. Is at most museums, there's only a fraction of the collection on display. So at the British Museum, it's only 0.4% of the collection that's on display. Smithsonian, it's 2% with all their museums. At Museum Victoria in Melbourne, it's 0.8% that's on display of a 16 million object collection. So the visitors see almost nothing of it. This was a data browser for the museum's 360 3D system. It's an export from the content management system, and it only took 15 minutes to extract the data from the database. It's 18 themes. It traverses indigenous materials, social history, and natural sciences, which are typically silos within the Museum Victoria Data Archive. They're temporally distributed in the 360, and then you can operate on the database. So click on an image, you can zoom into the images. It automatically creates a wordle from the description of the object. So like these days you would do this with, ChatGPT or whatever. And then you can access the original record. Perhaps the most important thing is the metadata relationships that it draws between different objects that are typically not easy to associate with each other. And that is the mechanism by which you explore this data set. There's no search engine, there's no didactic typing. It's really a serendipitous discovery machine or a serendipitous curating machine. This is another moving image archive work, and it's based on EPFL seminal Montreux Jazz archive. It's a UNESCO Memory of the World. It's 11,000 hours of video. And in this work, I just took the jazz bit. So jazz and all its subgenres, it equates to about 13,000 videos, yeah? And we took every artist that appears, and each artist is a node, and the link strength between the nodes is defined by the number of times one artist plays with another artist. And so at the very center of that dense network, I won't make you guess, but it's B.B. King. So he was the most, in a way, collaborative, but also the most senior of the jazz performers found in this archive. If you're on the periphery, you could just be young. So we took that data, and then you're lying under the dome, and you have a spherical ball in your hands, and this emulates the hemisphere in which the work is staged. You navigate inside this constellation, and the search paradigm to overcome this problem of expert knowledge is really just listening to the system. So it's akin to tuning a radio, searching by listening, circumventing the lack of public knowledge into who the jazz greats are. So hearing what you like drives the design to unfold in 3 layers. You go from the spaghetti neural net, everybody there, to all the songs by the performer that you've actually selected. And then if you select one of those performances, you go to the full song from the beginning. It's 1970s retro graphics, and you'll see how it works.
Sail on, my little honeybee, sail on. Why you go?
So in this new project, Narratives from the Long Tail, we're developing interactive visualization frameworks for more than 200,000 hours of archival video from 4 major collections in Europe. The Eye Museum in the Netherlands with their Mutoscope collection that you're looking at here, all of Swiss TV, the Montreux Jazz, and the Olympic Museum collection. So in our work, machine learning and computer vision is used to create narrative coherence across the spatial, temporal, social, affective and aesthetic vectors that we extract from these massive archives. So ultimately, we produce a 360 3D narrative visualization engine, which is multi-participatory, and situates audiences and their experiences in the center of knowledge production, simulating and stimulating innovation in archival practices. What it has meant, actually, in practical terms, is almost 2 years of back-end development, simply being able to use machine learning and computer vision to extract a lot of information. We obviously augment existing metadata, but as many of you will know who work in the archive world, metadata is often patchy. So this is a way of getting inside the images and reframing them for visitor experience and dealing with masses of data. So Stereo Spectacular is another example of how we leverage large archives. And in this case, it's of historic stereographic pairs found in many collections throughout the world. And maybe there are some at the Chini. And in our case, we're focusing on just one event, the Universal Exposition of 1867. So this is an image of the site, always attuned to spectacle. Napoleon III, the French emperor, instigated this exhibition in Paris. It was designed with an innovative iron building that you see in the center of the screen and included over 100 national pavilions in a vast park on the Champ de Mars. The fair marked a turning point in visual culture, far from being a traditional display of manufactured goods and natural resources. It mobilized contemporary technologies in the service of history and museography in order to create an immersive experience that was a sensation at the time. And the giant elliptical palace was arranged as this panoptic machine. And the fair brought together approximately 50,000 exhibitors from 32 countries and attracted an estimated 11 million visitors over 8 months. So our work conjoins historical research in the investigation of this great globalizing event with the historic technologies of vision that were mobilized at the fair. And we've amassed about 1,000 stereo plates from multiple collections worldwide. We're at the early stages of this project. And I'll just show you this kind of process. So we have many collections all over the world dealing with the same issue. These images are printed on cards. They can only be viewed by an original viewing device, which is often not available. And also they are damaged because they are often heavily used. So we spend a lot of time rectifying for stereo projection, either in our 360 3D system, but you can do it for others to make correct stereo views. Rectification, removing of artifacts, denoising, and upscaling where necessary, depending on the archival quality. We do algorithmically based recoloring, which in fact has a big impact. There are lots of debates in the archival world about the value of recoloring, and you have to be extremely cautious in the way you use it. But in general, it has a big impact on the visitors. And we have a PhD, Dhruva Gowda, who's working on developing a tool basically for archive holders to go through this entire process in a much more automated way. And this is the runtime from the animatic. So we developed a wireframe of all the buildings on the site, and then we geolocated in their correct positions all of the images that can be found that we have so far. This one doesn't have 100 in, and there are quite a few duplicates while we sort out the project, but you get the general idea. You're drifting around in 360 3D and exploring this world. It will be augmented with a rich soundscape. It was a very noisy fair. There were lots of industrial objects there. And it's designed for exhibitions that will show in Paris and Washington starting in 2026. And it's, I guess it puts into place, into motion, the unprecedented play of mirrors that such a fair represents. Delegates came from all over the world, and to augment the display, we're using their handwritten commentaries, which will be sonified in different languages, depending on the location. So one of the reasons that it will show in Washington is because this was the first moment that the Americans came onto the world stage post-Civil War and said, look at all our industry, look at all our machines, they're truly fantastic, and move aside, you decorative arts people. So this was the moment that that happened. So there's a lot to say about embodiments and virtual worlds. In post-processual archaeology, for instance, there's a big body of theory in symmetrical archaeology as well. But Christopher Tilley says that kinesthetic approaches to landscape stress the role of the carnal human body. The way in which we perceive and relate to visual imagery is fundamentally related to the kinds of bodies we have. Christopher Tilley describes, he's an art historian and a photo historian, and he describes corporeal embodied aesthetics, the way in which iconic images transfix their viewers. And embodiment theory informs presence theory, which really comes from the world of virtual reality and computer graphics, and is central to how we might define and extend in a post-digital encounter with cultural heritage. So a few examples that really go in that theme are here. So Look Up Mumbai was designed for the Prince of Wales Museum in Mumbai, adopted here as the epicenter of an artistic exploration that specifically focuses on the ceiling architectures of Mumbai's heritage and contemporary buildings and transforms them into an urban celestial imaginary. Mumbai's architectural heritage is unrivaled in India. The city has one of the largest numbers of grand neo-Gothic style architecture, numerous examples of Indo-Saracenic architecture, and of any city, the world's largest number of Art Deco buildings. We shot 168 gigapixel images all over the city, both old and new sites. So this is the Baujilard Museum. This is Terminal 2, the then new Mumbai airport. So it was staged in a hemispherical dome, a 6-meter diameter dome under the 60-foot ceiling of the Prince of Wales Museum, and 2,000 people a day came to lie down and look up, rediscovering their city with fresh eyes. And I guess what's important here is that many of these buildings, even though they're heritage buildings, they're really socially exclusive. And this is a mode of access that's completely democratic. And the dome, or rather the application, uses a computer vision algorithm that randomly selects any image and creates a unique transition between one image and the next. So in effect, you could lie there all day and never see the same thing twice. And we know that the perceived hemispheric curvature of full domes have been rendered architecturally by many cultures throughout the world and used to enfold the most sacred environments, from Buddhist stupas and Jain temples to Islamic mosques and Christian cathedrals. Dome constructions are places of ritual, communion, and transcendence. The concept of an experiential domed environment emerged from the attempts to simulate the spherical gestalt of the human visual field, and were designed to exploit and extend sensory perception. That would be the digital full dome. So in collaboration with the Enugu elders and the National Museum of Australia, we created 2 other dome experiences under the title Travelling Kankarangalpa, the songline of the 7 Sisters. The songline, which is an indigenous story that talks about land and behavior and peoples as you move across the landscape, is one of the most defining and predominant meta-narratives in mainland Australia. But until this exhibition, it had never been told in the public domain before. And there was a very traumatic, as you're probably aware, history of colonial contact in Australia, which made the custodians of these songlines very wary of bringing them into the public domain. And after a lengthy negotiation with the National Museum, the Enugu elders decided it was time to bring this songline into the public domain because it was becoming lost. It was in jeopardy. So that's where the project emerged. And the digital dome was chosen by the Matu sisters, who are the artists who depict much of the contemporary versions of the 7 Sisters songline. And they chose it to simultaneously express the sphere of the world around us, the sky above and the land below. So enveloping viewers as they lie down supine, as the creation beings that are in this story travel the land, leaving land formations in their wake, such as Cave Hill and the constellations of Pleiades and Orion in the southern night sky. So in this work, we made photogrammetry of a single cave which had never had an image taken of it, and so a very sacred place. We also did time-lapse photography, gigapixel imaging, drone-based panorama, a whole range of imaging modalities to space itself and the constellations of the natural cave. Elements in this cave that remain even super sensitive, sacred today, and so they are not shown inside. And the second journey was a series of artworks made by the Matu sisters, the custodians of the story. So here we see an image. It was a ceremony to gift these jumpy figures, these trussed grass figures, which represent the 7 sisters. They were given to the National Museum, and this is a ceremony to sing them off the land to their new home. So they look really great there. By the time you get them to the museum, of course, though, things are a bit different. It looks like a bit of a morgue, out of context. But in this context, we were able to make photogrammetric models of all of them. And then the Matu artists painted a whole series of images for the full dome in the round. So these are very elaborate narrative formations which had to be interpreted for us, and we then had to interpret them for a mass public and also an international mass public without any kind of didactic approach. So they were animated and also scanned and everything else that you need to do to bring it into a full dome environment. The snake is Wadi Nero, who is the bad guy in this story. So it was really a watershed in National Museum of Australia and Indigenous relations that resulted from this lengthy negotiation of about 7 years and a real profound attention to protocol and Indigenous sensibility or understanding of how to do this project. And my laboratory wrote a research grant to build the full dome system for the museum and to build this application. And ultimately the museum went on to build a system themselves. And I think what's important is that the university sector has the ability to create moments of innovation for organizations that might not otherwise do it. Once proven, they move on to go forward with many other projects in this domain. So it's been touring all over the world. It just closed at the Quai Branly in Paris. It was in the Humboldt Forum. It was in the UK. I believe it's going off to Sweden next. So it's a very watershed show. So moving from ancient Australia to historic India, Place Humpy is an artwork that was commissioned for France India Year in 2006, and it's subsequently toured all over the world. So Humpy is a monumental World Heritage Precinct and a vibrant center of contemporary pilgrimage. And the artwork recombines 25 square kilometers of this extraordinary terrain in a 3D panoramic imaginary. It's a granite boulder field, so it looks magnificent. We're shooting stereographic panoramas. It's quite a rare camera. There's only 4 of them in the world, and we have 2. But it produces a left and a right eye on film, 220 film, which is then drum scanned for projection. This gives us almost unlimited resolution, which is not the same as what you can get out of a digital equivalent. We create a panoramic landscape which you can explore in an interactive system. We do ambisonics for 3D architecture of sound. And the somatic resonances in Place Humpy are informed by aspects of Indian cultural and religious life, in particular this history of chromolithography and the scopic regimes of magical realism. And this is a scene from the Ramayana of Kishkinda, the home of the monkeys, and Humpy is said to be Kishkinda. So that's where that comes in. So these strategies of animation were done to recall this conversation between the idioms of chromolithography, theater photography, and film that were really embedded in a 19th and 20th century view of India, or Indian cosmology rather, and mythology. And they were done by Indian artists and animators. So it was, in fact, the first 3D animation ever done in India. It took a whole floor of computers to render out these small animated vignettes of Hindu gods. That was Lord Ganesha. Motion capture for animation. This is Shiva dancing as Nataraj. And then the whole work is brought together in this system. It has a 360-degree screen. It has a motorized platform in the center where you're able to rotate your field of view. In this case, it's passive stereo, and about 25 people in this system, and any member of the public takes everybody else on a serendipitous journey of discovery through the many wonderful locations at Humpy. There's a microphone mounted on the platform which releases chapter 13 and 37 of the Ramayana to do with the gathering of the monkeys at Kishkinder, because as I mentioned, Hampi is Kishkinder. Then you can go into some of these panoramas. They are augmented with these animated 3D birds. In the background, you will hear music by Dr. L. Subramanian, who's a Carnatic violin superstar, who also contributed to the project. So this became an exhibition. It toured all over the world first, then it became an exhibition on the archaeological imaginary of that site. And then ultimately a whole museum complex was built for it in India for that exhibition right next to the site itself. So finally, after about 7 years, it made its way back to India as a permanent museum. There's some simple strategies for dealing with archives with barcodes and large-scale projection and labels in 3 languages. So iconoclasm, looting, warfare, natural disasters, and also not so natural disasters, mass tourism, climatic catastrophes. We all know that these forces act on cultural heritage with increasingly frequent devastation. And here, we're now at the edge of the Gobi Desert in China at the Dunhuang Caves at the nexus of the Silk Road. So this World Heritage Site has 492 caves carved into this escarpment. Inside, 45,000 square meters of painted frescoes and over 2,000 stucco statues crafted by Buddhist monks over a period of 1,000 years. This sublime art treasury is like nothing else in the Chinese Buddhist world, and most of these caves are permanently closed to the public to ensure their preservation in this era of heritage at risk, really, where the digital provides the only mode of access. So there's an enormous preservation effort underway there, led by the Dunhuang Academy. They have about 60 full-time photographers. They do laser scanning, camera array photography. They stitch the data together in situ because obviously you don't want to miss a bit because it's very hard to go back. And it takes about 3 months to digitize a single cave. And Pure Land's AR was originally done for Art Basel in Hong Kong, and it was designed, the whole set of projects. We actually did 5 with the Dunhuang Academy. But these projects were designed to activate the kinesthetic spatial responses of viewers. They give us important insights into how interfaces operate in the museological domain. So it's 1-to-1 scale. We print the wireframe from the laser scan on the walls of this exhibition booth, and then visitors are walking inside the digital model. So it's a kind of kinesthetic experience in that sense. It has 3 noteworthy qualities: the way that it harnesses socialization around a single screen at the core of the museological experience, actually. So it's not about everybody getting their own device. It's more about how you set up the dynamics for that. Interfaces for young kids, middle-aged ladies, grandmother and grandchild. Grandmother abandons the grandchild and takes off of the screen. So non-ageist systems, also very important. And the third most noteworthy quality of this work is that of virtual tourism. The wife takes the iPad from her handbag and she films her husband's experience as if they were really there. So it was reformed as a fully interactive work for a full dome at the World Economic Forum. It's a pyramidal dome, so it absolutely suits a hemispherical shape in which to show it. And one of the other works, this one toured again, also all over the world, 360 3D. And indeed, a single data set was used for these 5 different works. that now have been seen by millions of people. And it's this malleability of digital data that is its intrinsic quality. We also see issues of how aura arises from the entanglement of the real and its digital double. So decades of computer science and engineering have revolutionized the tenets of verisimilitude and representation. And this is a Swiss-based project, or it's a Swiss object. It concerns a painted panorama, a Swiss national icon, the Battle of Confederation, which took place in 1476 and was painted by the German artist Louis Braun in 1893. And about 40 people in his atelier took about 8 months to paint it. So it's very significant for the part that it plays in Swiss national identity and the creation of the nation states. It was only ever shown for 7 years in Zurich and in Geneva, and it was abandoned at the end of the great panoramic era, historic panoramic era, with the demise of that media format, the advent of cinema, and so on. It was no longer an effective business model. So it was abandoned, then rediscovered in the 1990s. Conservation effort was mounted on the canvas. It took 6 years to do that. And then it was re-erected in a panoramic screen as it would have originally been seen. And then Jean Nouvel, the French architect, built a box for it, floated it on the Lake of Merton for the Swiss National Expo in 2002. It was imagined that that would be relocated and the object would go on permanent display. But in fact, that wasn't possible, and it was returned to obscurity. And this is where we rescued it from. So an undisclosed military facility in the Swiss Alps. It had been sitting there for 20 years. And the full length of the image is 100 meters. It's 10 meters high. There are 3 rolls. They weigh 3 tons. And we took them to our laboratory. We worked together with a conservation team and a full assessment was done of the painting. We built spare rolls for the canvas. We built motorized rigs to be able to transport the conservation team over the image. We took a lot of VIP tours on that platform. And then we began the digital twin. This is using sponsorship from Phase 1, an IXH 150 megapixel camera with a 72mm lens. And we built another rig to image the system. So it's, let me show you another image, yeah. So 128,000 photographs were taken with that camera. Ultimately, we created a 1.6 trillion pixel image. It's about 1,000 DPI. So it turns out that this is the largest image ever created by a factor of 2. But it's not really rocket science. There was a few curveballs in there. It's a hyperbolic image, so any kind of stitching software doesn't work, even though all the images are sharp and they overlap by 50%. You can't actually just imagine it will all stitch together. So we had to write some software to correct for the hyperbolic nature of any panoramic screen. There's a PhD working on this project as well, building really the ontological framework, describing absolutely everything in the scene, a sort of XY coordinate system, deep mapping, which will then link to other resources that sit around this panorama in terms of historical objects and documents. That kind of data, of course, allows you to zoom into the tiniest brushstroke and reveal more than the naked eye can see. And so we are able to look also at the materiality of this painting. And we're now at the beginning. We've just finished stitching the image. So this is a fake image, as you would probably realize. And we are developing all the software for this, for exhibitions that really begin end of next year throughout Switzerland, going to 2026, which is the 550th year commemoration. We have a whole range of strategies for interpretation, and this one maybe I'll highlight. It's a device that you put around your neck. It's a smell necklace. It releases synthetic smells in real time. So you can imagine the smells that we're talking about. So goat, horse, blood, sweat, and so on and so forth. So there will be 12 synthetic smells, and it's a Swiss-Chinese collaboration. We're working with reenactment fighters to be able to create volumetric video, which will bring 3D augmentations to the panorama. These will be done in a volumetric video studio. We're able to map all the locations where the panorama was imaged from. So it's a merger of perspectives, in fact. And so we bring this all together through shooting gigapixel images of the contemporary landscape. So we will do that shortly. So I'll just introduce how this concept works. This is another image, another panorama that we imaged for the State Library of New South Wales. Again, about 1,000 DPI, linear line scanning. It's very historic. Henry Barker's 1853 etching of Constantinople, done for Robert Barker, his brother's famous panorama in Leicester Square. We know exactly where it was etched from, so Galata Tower in Taksim. And we're able to shoot a gigapixel image from Galata Tower. So here we just print the image on a small screen, and then you augment the printed image, the historic image, with its contemporary gigapixel view. This really works in Istanbul. It also really works in the Swiss landscape, where little changes, but there is a certain amount of interesting change. So it doesn't work so well in other contexts. So it's perfect for us at this point. We obviously, this is a multi-user magnifying glass experiment. So there are 20 people in this system. When people come together and they join their magnifying glasses, you get increased magnification. So one of the things that really interests us is how we can make these experiences multi-user social. A lot of the work that we've done to date is single user multi-spectator, very strong paradigm. But what are the other social paradigms of interaction? And that's what we are dealing with here. And of course, we're busy on many other projects with generative AI. So here you type it into your phone. You don't see this on the screen, but we're able to start to augment the panorama itself with different features. We constrained it to be landscape features, but we've actually done pretty much everything on this panorama using these generative AI tools. So because of my interest in digital twins and deepfakes, you could say, I did this exhibition, Deepfakes Art and Its Double, for the pavilion. So it's about 1,000 square meter show. And actually, I'm going to read you the curatorial blurb for this show, and then the images will play in the background. They're asynchronous to the text, so don't try and marry the two together. They're just really wallpaper for this narrative, I guess. So today's technologies coalesce to replicate cultural objects with ultimate fidelity, simultaneously as algorithms and computer vision reperform and reprocess the digitally visible. They're exposing the optical unconscious of art, calling us to re-examine once again objecthood itself. Remediated through participatory interfaces such as mixed, augmented, and virtual realities, the exhibition created new performative platforms for the complex archetypes that emerge out of computational practices as they intersect with art heritage. Through 21 installations, the exhibition was equally focused on affirming and activating visitors' sensory experiences, while also grappling with the critical implications of digital materiality that objects possess in post-original form. Cultural deepfakes, as I came to call them, have manifold significance. With its propensity for perpetual or peripheral vision, machine learning has amplified the possible futures for curatorial and artistic practices, antagonizing outdated notions of authority, authenticity, and access. These practices are generating perpetually new archival entities, concurrently formed and formless. Encryption of digital counterparts in place of originals is exploding systems and codes of ownership, custodianship, and repatriation. And the accumulation and exploitation of digital patrimonial and cultural capital by technological elites unnervingly reenacts colonial constructs. Synchronously, new forms of cryptographic control, such as non-fungible tokens, are being enabled for the network circulation of art, promoting the blockchain as a potential dominion of arbitrary value is the hallmark of the intensification of late capitalism's newest investment for its enmeshed cultural objects, rather than, we could say, their depropriation in the commons. Deepfake's art in its double is a cumulative narrative that embarks on these cross-cutting themes, traversing the simulacrum, mirror worlds, digital twins, cryptocurrency, machine intelligence, while engaging with age-old issues such as mimesis, reenactment, memory, and more recently, decolonization. The exhibition's installations cycle us through some of the antitheses around which the history of art has been circumscribed. As postmodernism recedes, taking with it the assumed meaning of things, cultural deepfakes have become a central pivot for this dialectic. So this exhibition, bits of a tour in various forms and also up to Zurich. And it's the subject of an upcoming book, actually, which will be published by Routledge this year. Deepfakes, a critical lexicon of digital museology, which really deals with many of the themes that I just mentioned from a more critical point of view. The next section it lies in a body of theory of deep mapping, and I would say cartocriticism. It's part of a grant that we wrote originally on this theme, and we know an emphasis on absolute Euclidean space or Euclidean coordinate systems really frustrates the humanist effort to understand how spaces change over time and how spatial relativities emerge and develop into narratives. We need to reconceive interpretations of the map as moving, embodied, social, technical, and emotive, and as an opportunity to prevent alternative visual solutions to the specific problems of depicting and describing places and time. So conceiving of maps through a deep mapping schema posits that they're never fully formed and not static, but emerge in navigational processes where everything is on the move. And this perfectly suited the backdrop to the project, the Atlas of Maritime Buddhism, that we went on to develop. So the Atlas is based on the compelling story of the spread of Buddhism from India through the seaports of Southeast Asia and the South China Sea, supported by archaeological and historical evidence that's never been brought together before. The research and exhibition series has profound contemporary relevance to the socio-economic and political transformation of the world, while the far-reaching enterprises of Belt and Road reactivate ancient overland and maritime trading routes. The Atlas provides a counterbalance to these prevailing narratives, which neglect the importance of Pan-Asian maritime countries and Buddhist entrepreneurship in the expansion of trade from the 2nd century BCE to the 15th century CE. So the spread of Buddhist doctrines, here we are dealing, so this narrative is the maritime part. We have the overland narratives, which are quite well known. There are many Silk Road shows, but the maritime is less described. And we would call them all together, a term developed by Professor Lou Lancaster, a Buddhist scholar from Berkeley, the Great Circle of Buddhism, and we are doing the maritime bits. So the spread of Buddhist doctrines from India to China triggered a profusion of cross-cultural exchanges that had a profound impact on Asian and world history. It was a complex process that involved multiple societies and diverse groups of people, including missionaries, itinerant traders, artisans, and medical professionals. So we have textiles, of course, but really what was emerging was a spice trade. Black pepper from the forests of South India, for example, represented a huge amount of the cargo. So really the maritime silk route is more like a spice route. The Buddhist doctrines were spread by sailors who took them as Buddhism, who took paraphernalia with them on their voyages, and then these intrepid monks from China and present-day Indonesia who played key roles in the exchange between ancient China and India. Monks introduced new doctrines and texts to the Chinese clergy, carried and distributed the Buddhist paraphernalia for performance of ritual and ceremony, and also provided detailed accounts of their spiritual journeys to India. So here we have I Ching. He goes from central China down through Srivijaya in Indonesia, Kedah in Malaysia, and then up into the great northern Buddhist universities in Nalanda and so on in North India. He translated more than 60 sutras from Sanskrit into Chinese and kept very meticulous documentary records. So we have an incredible resource beyond the extant remains. So the first job we had was to image this complex of stuff and to develop a deep-driven or deep mapping narrative-driven information visualization framework. So to interactively explore different aspects of this atlas. So we started in the rock-cut caves of India. We did hundreds and hundreds of sites. We did thousands of locations. We recorded them with this camera because of the fidelity of the 3D and the speed with which it can capture images. Just to give you an idea of some of these images. So this is the mist encapsulated Borobudur in Indonesia. This is Shwagan Pagoda in Yangon in Myanmar. Many sacred, very important sacred sites. So in addition to the 360 3D analog, we also captured spherical video, gigapixel imaging, and we have a digital rig for stereographic panoramic capture. Gigapixels obviously provide you with unparalleled spherical image resolution. You can see here, this image is also at Ajanta in India, World Heritage Site. Spherical imaging, again, this is in Mandalay. The Buddha is pointing to the establishment of Mandalay below the hill. We also record a lot of spherical videos, so contemporary pilgrimage. This is up in Bihar State. Thai Buddhists. Ambisonics, so 3D architecture of sound here again to complement everything. This is Sanchi in India. It's the oldest Buddhist stone structure in India. This is the 1st to 3rd century site at Kanagana Hali near Sanati. Is an absolutely sublime site of elaborate sculptured material, and depicted in them is King Ashoka, who transformed India with the written word. These are the great universities such as Nalanda, which flourished in Bihar in the 5th century. This is earthquake-racked Bagan. During that period, there was a big earthquake. All the turbines of the monuments were falling down, so all the scaffold was erected to prevent this from happening. This is in the Irrawaddy, first sort of agrarian landhold for Buddhism in this country, and in the Pew kingdoms. So agrarian and elite Buddhism merged together here. Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka, these massive brick structures, Gilvahara in Polonnaruwa, ancient Sinhalese sculpture, which is absolutely gorgeous. Buduru Wagala on the left-hand side, Mahayana Buddhism, rock cut sculptures. This is a lotus pond, again at Polonnaruwa. So a massive Ayutthaya in Thailand during the monsoon. So this massive fieldwork trip is also accompanied by photogrammetric models made of many very, very important sculptures in national museums. Varman VII from the National Museum from the Angkorean Kingdom. So all of this material was brought together, both as a touring exhibition, and there is a permanent exhibition here at Fo Guang Shan Monastery. It received 2 million visitors in the first 18 months. So it's a bit of a blockbuster. A lot of contemporary narratives here, looking at iconography, looking at these pilgrim travelers, looking at architectural differences throughout the region. And then these large-scale digital experiences mixed in this stuff. This is a 12-meter diameter panoramic site. I won't go into that because it's a bit old. Linear navigator for the all of the panoramas. These are iDomes. We have a whole series on the rock-cut caves of India, a spherical gigapixel, and then contemporary spherical video of contemporary rituals and performances. So a whole gamut of material. The mixture of real objects and digital objects that you see here. And other modalities. As mentioned before, this material is incredibly malleable. So here are gigapixels, then reformed as a playful interactive experience inside a gallery. And of course, everything will work on your phone if you want. One of the works that was created for this is Double Truth. And in this work, participants rotate a human scale viewing platform, and in circumambulation from left to right, they generate a dynamic tempo sequence that reveals each of the 15 sacred sculptures one by one. Avalokiteshvara, it's the most important sculpture in Sri Lanka, national treasure. Reversing the platform, meanwhile, reveals unexpected materialities. Icons fold, fragment, and refold through a series of computer graphic transformations and parametric visualizations. The geometries of the digital transcend the original visible and material properties. And this work is really a meditation on the two truths from Mahayana Buddhism, those of the mundane and the absolute. So in this work, everything is sonified using ethnographic music recordings that come from all the countries that are represented from about the 1930s to the 1950s. So there are archival recordings from Southeast Asia. Yep, okay, right. At the very end, of this show, the monastery wanted a donation bowl installed. So that's what we do. And in 1 year, they made more money in donation than it cost to build the exhibition. So it's partly about the cultural complex of donation and dharma. And the more you donate, the better things are later on. But also that there is a huge amount being done in Buddhist pilgrimage and tourism, I guess, tourism. And we're about to permanently install this exhibition at Nagarjunakonda in this Buddhist site. It's a new Buddhist site with this massive stupa, very beautiful. And this is part of Telangana state and the government's push to harness the Buddhist circuit tourism that happens in India from all over Southeast Asia. So it's a big business. As far as Indians go, there's only 0.8% of Indians identify as Buddhists. So it's not for local people, it's really for this Buddhist pilgrimage that comes. This is actually, Nagarjunakonda is a really important Buddhist site that was flooded by a dam beforehand. We're currently working on a big project in India as well on digital twins, so just Buddhist sculptures. These are images from the atlas, but we've just started to shoot about 100 images looking at the blockchain and a touring exhibition and the way that a blockchain network can help protect cultural materials in a translocated heritage context in issues of not only distribution, but potentially repatriation and so on. There's lots to say about that project, but we're just at early days. So the augmented reality, I'll just show a few augmented worlds. It's a bit of a buzz moment for what they call spatial computing, which has been around since the 1970s. And here's a few works in this domain. So this one is a work based on Leonardo da Vinci painting, which many of you may know, the Virgin of the Rocks. We also know that Renaissance art actualizes the painterly discovery of perspectival space, while the ensuing ability to represent an imaginary that extends beyond the surface of the canvas into a distant horizon. And that's really the concept that this work is based on in a very literal sense. So there are two versions of this painting. One is at the Louvre, and that's the one on the right-hand side, and the one on the left is at the National Gallery in London. And we worked on the one on the left-hand side for a big exhibition coinciding with Leonardo's 500th commemoration. So here we take the main protagonists in the painting and we create them on a cutout. And then people are walking inside the recreated caves. So we used computer graphic to represent the painting literally, but also, of course, we're making many things up in such a process. So once you enter inside the cave, you are walking around inside it. And as many of you will know, it's covered, or much flora inside, some fauna, and also a big river that runs outside the end of the cave. So it's really a work that tries to synchronize the perspectival discoveries that were made during the Renaissance period. In this work, Open Science, it's an eclectic array for EPFL's 50th birthday party. So it turns out at the pavilions, there are 50 lockers that you can use inside the main building. And so 50 lockers, 50 years, we had to do something. So this is like a contemporary Wunderkammer of art and science, yeah? We worked with over 50 laboratories, well, actually 50 laboratories to create this work. As you can see, it's iPads. And what happens on your screen is the locker door opens up and you see an object of science inside as you're moving around. So no labels, these are all under QR code on the wall if you want to read more. Every animation is done by someone different. So it has this quite wonderful eclecticism. It looks at the great objects of science for the university. And of course, you can use them as storage spaces as well. Safe House was a series of works that we did during the coronavirus. It also uses this locker type concept. On the front of each locker is the coronavirus image. And when you, inside these lockers are individuals, it's akin to being locked up inside your apartment. And their existential tension is allayed by doing all sorts of different exercises. So here's actually a multi-user work where these locker doors open up when you're looking at them and these animations play out. So it's as if people are trapped inside their houses doing all these exercises that were streamed from the internet into everyone's living room. So it's very funny, very playful. So we've come to the last major section for creation of material, and then we'll have a look at some. We'll have a look at the evaluation after that. So embodied knowledge systems. We know that intangible heritage is defined by its reliance on tacit or embodied knowledge systems. And Hong Kong is really an extraordinary reservoir of intangible heritage, primarily of Hakka people, and including some of the most prominent martial artists in the world. And this living heritage made internationally so famous by Jackie Chan, Gordon Liu, and Hong Kong cinema is now in danger of becoming lost. We work and have worked for 13 years with 33 elite Kung Fu practitioners. And the living archive is like a 4D typology based on extensive motion capture, a host of green screen technologies, and also high-speed video. We've done about 75% of the total repertoire of open hand and weapon sequences, as they're called, and about 25 styles that is represented in this archive. We've had about to have 13 exhibitions worldwide on this in many, many different forms with building. This pose matching installation, the visitors invited to reenact a way for us to read mocap's hidden traces, in fact to re-perform or reenact the gesture. This is Lam Sai Wing. I'm just showing you a few examples because these are massive shows. So I'll just show you a few. This is Lam Sai Wing. He was the first Kung Fu master to use photography for studio training. So the masters are very interested in the use of technology for transmission. So we also had hand drawings of him, which once we took them all together, we could make these animated GIFs, if you like. And we have these photographs of him. So we made a model of Lam Sai Wing, and then we asked his nephew to perform one of the classic texts, book represented movements, iron wire boxing, and we put him in a mocap studio. So we joined together the digital model of Lam Sai Wing, great-great-grandson's motion. So it's a weird rival object in that sense. Big chi building exercise in its stance lifestyle. This is a rear projected stereographic system that allows people to walk around and look in to see what the Kung Fu masters are doing at one-to-one scale at any moment in time. And these can be reinterpreted through various Kung Fu moves, motion over time, and analytics. So this is related to speed on the body at any given moment. And this is a typical particle simulation. We like to talk about, actually, Brian Rotman defined the term corporeal gestural haptic writing. It recognizes motion capture as a continuous topological model. And by doing this kind of abstraction, you allow for the easier attainment of the effective qualities of movement. And then it can be abstracted even further into the motion graphic systems. A linear navigator allows us to traverse all of the weapons and videos of the masters practicing with these weapons. These are Hakka people, so pushed out of China by the Han Chinese at the time. And so their weapons are very crude. These are park benches and iron bars and so on, farming implements. But of course, it still takes years of practice to make this perfect. We have a PhD doing a lot on ontology and this, how you can describe these embodied knowledge systems. So she's working closely together with the Kung Fu masters themselves. And we also do a lot of documentation of ritual that happens alongside. This is in fact a Jiao festival, a Taoist festival. All the Kung Fu masters perform here. And if we go around the corner here, you can actually see the Taoist priests in the background there. And around the corner, there were 30 dragons, unicorns, and lions in this particular event. It's convened to actually celebrate the end of a pandemic. So this was a typical clan picture in the 1970s in Hong Kong. Today it's somewhat different. These are all the Europeans that learn. This is a Czechoslovakian group. We've got Master Lam in the middle. It's really Europeans and Australians and Americans that are flocking to Hong Kong now to learn with these masters. This is another small work and really in the tradition of Ollie Poe or potential literature. This is Edwin Thumbu. He's the equivalent of a poet laureate in Hong Kong. When we made with this work with him, which is some time ago, 10 years ago, he was 85. We filmed him 30 times in a green screen studio in 3D. And then we distribute his image, and I'll show you how that works. So obviously, Ollie Poe or concrete poetry is really on these, really suits these ideas of computational techniques to create a matrix of individual lines of poetry and then to reassemble them just as Raymond Queneau did. So we put Edwin 30 times in the 360 system, and then you're cutting between different lines of poetry.
For instance, most footpaths shimmer and sweat at noon,
original.
knowing that bones are made from earth. When I say that sunlight, impure but beautiful, drink from the nectaries.
We loved it, by the way. And of course, once again, to go back to this issue that a single work can be reformulated in so many other ways. So this is the recombinatory poetry wheel, which deals with the same contents. Remaking of the Confucian rites, also a long scale or longitudinal project focused on the reperformance of rituals which haven't been performed for hundreds of years. Confucian Li is a concept that covers the realms of aesthetics, ethics, and ideology, but it's also a technique of the body, a skill which is learnt and inscribed. So this is a collaboration with Tsinghua University and the Center for Ritual Studies, City U, and Jialin Hall in Hong Kong. And it's really a close reading project based on the Book of Etiquette and Rites, or Yili, at core of, it's really the core of the traditional Confucian canon. And there are 17 rituals written in the form of a performance manual. Typically, they were passed down from generation to generation, but they were very esoteric. The text is very esoteric. So it takes about a year for the scholars at Tsinghua to read one performance and to reconstruct it. So it's very labor intensive and close reading project. They do all the archaeological research, the archival research that might help support some of the descriptions that they find within the text. And then all of this material is reconstructed and brought together and is filmed from a myriad of different perspectives. And the idea is to create these interactive tools to be able to understand these rituals in tapping ceremony. The material finds its way all over the world in different forms for the opening of the China Exchange in London, for the Contemporary Art Biennale in Slovenia, in combination with real objects at the Art Institute Chicago. It can be both real time, it can also be movie sequences. This is the archery ceremony, just to give you an idea of the scale with which this is being completed. This is shot in Beijing, where we recreate the temple at exactly 1-to-1 scale, and that everything can be later removed. It's like a giant green screen. Here's Professor Pang and his team making all the costumes and training the Beijing Opera, so they're all elite performers. And then filming them in a myriad of ways, of different techniques and technologies. So ultimately, we extract the characters from the scene, and then we rebuild the whole thing in computer graphics. So it's that's how it goes. A kind of virtual production studio. There's a lot to say about it on the theoretical side, which I won't go into given the time that we have left, but it's really could be described as the archaeology of the Chinese modern body, the way in which this body is constructed, both by the individual and in relation to the state, and so on. Applicable in many. So just to finish, if there is time, and if you want to stop now, you just let me know. I could go all day, you know. But this is a tool that is extremely useful, being able to understand the impact of these technologies and also of exhibitions more generally, in a way that is more nuanced than is typically achievable. So it's called Muse. It's a tablets-based tool that was designed for large-scale immersive environments, so for being inside the space. It integrates the voice of visitors within audience research and places the visitors' embodied narratives at the center of evaluation, assisting organizations and audience-centric approaches to designing future exhibitions and programs, and it helps to find value beyond the demographics. It started out in 2006 where we gave people blank pictures and they could draw on their body, and then we would aggregate them all, and ultimately became this tool 10 years later where you can create all your questions online, you deploy it to the app, you collect the material inside the space, it streams in real time back to the server, it aggregates and visualizes, and then we can also write correlated reports. So it collects basic demographic data, of course, but also more experiential data, and it uses a range of kind of cute computer graphics. I'm very comfortable, I'm less comfortable, I'm more very uncomfortable. This is about personal space, so the red ego in the middle, and you're moving all the dots around to describe what you prefer. You can draw pictures, you can leave audio files, you can take photographs, and we can also stream the data live inside any gallery. So we do that quite a lot. This is for the World Economic Forum exhibitions, and recently for the Cosmos Archaeology show. There was a big section on space junk, and people were invited to draw their own space junk, and we ended up very quickly with about 7,500 images of the cultural imaginary of space junk. So images are hard to analyze, but they're lots of fun, and we stream all this data live for the visitors. We also rolled it out here recently in a World Heritage precinct, 5 different surveys simultaneously for the World Heritage site of Hegra, for the Performing Arts Center of Moria, for the Desert X art show at the airport, and also very importantly within the community. In 24 days, we got 6,500 responses across 29, well, in total it was 120 data points. So it correlated to 1,200 pages of reports. It also provides very timely data for being able to understand what's going on in such a vast site, this 22,000 square kilometers of site. So this was really important. It's currently distributed in 24 museums in Switzerland, and we just actually put it out as a little tool in the commercial world to bring it into the world of museums. I can tell you a lot more about it. These are just any language you want, so on and so forth. And then these reports. So it's very easy to aggregate data. It's less easy to correlate data. And we do these handcrafted reports based on conversations with the museums themselves and what their strategies and expectations are. So I think these are just slides. So I think I can stop here so we could maybe have a chat.
Great. So are there any questions? If anyone wants to speak, you can write in the chat or just take the floor.
I see one here. The genesis of the projects, absolutely. Look, almost all of them are written, are research grants that I write that then have multiple outcomes in the museological domain. So partly it's about also understanding that research is possible, that what we produce for the public domain is not just product, that it is a place of research, and that these works are not enacted in a way until they are in the public domain. So even though it starts in the laboratory with research funding, we then attract research other partners, which are museum partners, to these projects, and then ultimately deploy them in the public domain. So that's definitely a major access for the big works. And then there are commissioned works where a museum just wants something, and we work together on what that might be. And yeah, those are the main two approaches. Yeah. And there's another question here on publications. Indeed. So I could send to the Jeannie a publication list, yeah, which might be relevant. In different aspects of this, obviously, we've been writing for many years on these topics, about 30 years. So there's a lot that's been written. And of course, my new book, Deepfakes, A Critical Lexicon of Digital Museology, is, I mean, it's intended for scholars and students, but it's also intended for museum directors and curators to try and get a handle on what are the technologies and their theoretical, philosophical implications once you go down that path. So that's what it attempts to do, and also to capture most of the modern techniques and to give correct definitions. Partly what's happening in the cultural sector, in the conversations in the cultural sector, is everyone uses the same term to describe very different things. And so trying to give a language or a set of descriptions which are more or less coherent in a complex of definitions. So that's the dictionary approach. Yeah, absolutely. I'm reading Abira's comment here. She's particularly interested in the work with indigenous communities, the affordances of immersive technologies to enable multivocality and to move outside of the structures. And I can't agree with you more about how powerful those experiences are. They have to be developed together with community. The Kung Fu one is a really longitudinal relationship with a group. And similarly, the indigenous, I've done a few indigenous Australian works. These are really important kind of cultural negotiations that happen inside these systems. And what amazes me always is if we're showing Aboriginal Australians the full, all our technologies, it's the full dome that they go for. And it's this idea of being supported by the ground. It's like the whole world view, you know, and the ability to evoke their songline in this hemispherical space is just comes supernaturally. There's most people require, the people who make dome shows need a degree in mathematics to understand how to deform images. But here it's just out of the box. And they're very, very open, these platforms. I think what's really important, and it goes through all of our work, even the work with archives, is this idea that you can get around the text base, that there is another mode of entry into this, which isn't just some didactic knowledge that you have to hold to get there. And this multiple way of entry or openness to entry into these archives is really, really important. And if we look at, apparently 95% of all the Swiss archives are moving image archives for Swiss TV are digitized, and yet there's less than 5% available for access, So we're dealing with massive amount of digital data and very few modes of access that aren't for specialists. So, yeah. So there's a question here about the Renaissance period and books. Certainly we image a lot in our job, and we image everything. But a big book project we haven't actually done. We're more in the sites and object, 3D sculptural objects arena. Other people are doing amazing work with Renaissance books. We're scanning some ancient maps at the moment, for which we will build works. And certainly the more time I spend in Europe, of course, I come in contact with these great rare books. So map books in particular are the ones that are my focus at the moment, and also medieval fight books for medieval fighting. That's because of the interests around whole of environment encoding for martial arts or historic martial arts. So yeah, but I think there are brilliant Renaissance period book projects, I'm sure. And there's a question from Telegram. Radical intangibles. Okay. As a systemic designer, the whole of environment approach is important to me. Together with Lily Hibbard, you formalize computational. Please, could you tell us more about it? Sure. So computational museology is this description that I gave at the very beginning, which is about providing a conceptual and also practical framework that connects machine intelligence, what we can do with machines, to the curation of data, the world of knowledge or ontologies, to visualization, and then communities of publics and practitioners to that world of knowledge. So it's sort of this multi-part process. And in the publication, Radical Intangibles, Materializing the Ephemeral, is very much this idea that it's various theories in how you can bring the intangible cultural heritage into the museological domain. There is a massive fear around this issue because technologies, any form of documentation is like a kind of deadening of what is living. It's like the end of what is living. And so what are the approaches to re-articulate the living traditions, but in a museological context? And so there's a lot of theory there in reenactment theory and also in performance theory that informs that whole process. Whole of environments encoding is very much about you don't just deal with form and movement, but you deal with object, ritual, Chinese traditional medicine, whatever it is. There's many, many things to make up a whole of encoding approach, yeah? So that's what that particular term means. Yeah. That's great, Abira. Thanks.
We also receive a private question in the chat
Yep.
And it is about the team. So it says, it seems that for every project of this type is needed a multi-skilled team of people. Could you please tell us something about the different professionals involved? How big is usually your team?
Okay, so indeed, the teams change a bit. So currently, if we just go to the current circumstances, I have 30 people in my lab, but they're all funded out of grants. So that number goes up and down depending on what's going on. And so that's a big team locally, but also we have a range of software engineers all over the world that in fact can that plug in to do very specific jobs. They are multifaceted works. And as you can see, they're taking place in many, many different locations. So we travel a lot. A team would consist of, let's take the panorama project where we made the big image, right? We had to get mechanical engineers to build all the platforms. That took about a year. We had to conserve the objects, so conservation staff. We then had to image the project. That took about 2 months. We then had to stitch all the data together. We then have somebody who's doing ontologies and really the deep digital humanities. We then have military historians, very important, and medieval historians. And then we have software engineers for the computer graphics implementation. Currently, there are 3 working on that. We also have a sound engineer, actually 2, because it's very complex soundscape. And then we'll build an interface. So a couple more people involved in that, but it won't be so difficult. So we make it simple. So yeah, they are complex. Not everybody works full-time on the same project. They're working on multiple projects and they work as a team to solve different aspects. So yeah, but you can do a lot with a little, I can assure you, because in the early days we didn't have much at all, and we still built many great things. So there's a question here. One of the main issues is how to display and select captured data. The theme is not new. Precisely the reason. Perhaps you could briefly develop the theme to capture data from the user. Is that the question? So there's 2 ways to capture data about a user, if that's what the question is meaning. We log what everybody does. So we know every single interaction and what triggers that interaction. So that's a massive log. How much one wants to analyze it is debatable, but it's there. And in some projects, it's very important for our partners to understand how visitors, what they connect to what. So this can be a very, very rich source of implicit evaluation or implicit tracking. And then I personally am not so interested in non-explicit tracking. So I'm not interested actually in being able to track somebody's gaze. Gaze is different because it's actually an interface, but to dwell time inside a museum or any of those processes where the visitor is not being explicit about their subjective experience. So the explicit subjective experience is really what interests me most. And it's very different to saying that everybody stood over here for 10 minutes and only 5 minutes over there, you know? So those are the kinds of data uses that, how to select data. Oh, I see what you mean. So it's like, it's almost like a system that's a preferencing system, or yeah, an interest system. So that's possible to do, and we do that too, actually. And there are both algorithmic ways to do it and hard-coded ways to do it, right? Applying it to an entire exhibition is possible if you're doing that kind of show, which is fully digital. But it's certainly possible now to make reference systems very easily based. I mean, they do it online now all the time. So that as you are navigating inside this massive archive, you're seeing things that are similar to, or the system thinks you might like to see, and you can do it that way. We didn't do that for the Museum Victoria data browser, because in fact, we were really interested in drawing people away from the traditional narrative that they normally explore. It's why there's no search engine on that. So we don't want them to want to look for their favorite tractor. We actually want them to start somewhere and come to their favorite tractor through all of these associations. So it's not about refining someone's search, but expanding their field of interest. So it's quite a different philosophical framing. But yeah, totally get what you mean. Thanks. Okay.
We also have a question about the preservation and sustainability of these experiences.
Yes. So the raw data is the thing we preserve. What we do downstream from there is applications. Applications go out of date. So in media art, there is a movement that wants to be able to always use the old hardware, the original hardware. Everything about it needs to be authentic, but we take a slightly more pragmatic approach in that we describe and document every work in great detail, movies, images, text, and emulate or describe what the experience is intended to be. And down the track, so long as the graphic software is okay, the system itself can be rebuilt new, and we have no problem with that. But for some artists, this is not the case. You know? And then in terms of sustainability, in that sense, it's okay. I mean, occasionally you have to rewrite software, right? You have to emulate what you did before. Because things we have a classic example at the moment, this Beckett work, which was written with a really old games engine, and it's a really powerful work and people want to show it, but to do that, we have to recode the whole thing. We have all the data elements, but it has to be recoded. So it happens that will happen. But in general, the descriptive approach allows us to be able to emulate. In terms of these technologies in general and issues of sustainability, it's not easy territory. Anything with technology in it has a footprint for sure. So I'm just reading your question. They like to keep things perpetually. Yeah, so when we talk about archival quality imaging, for instance, we are talking about the highest possible fidelity archival material, which will be migrated through time. Yeah, that's what archives and libraries and museums are having to grapple with, is moving this digital data from one platform to another, backing it up on different systems, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of work going on in the storage space, which is quite interesting, where they're etching data into glass, and they're also creating synthetic DNA to store data. So I can give you an example. So the Montreux Jazz Archive, they digitized Miles Davis's Tutu and Smoke Over the Water by Deep Purple. They encoded it into synthetic DNA, supposedly stable for 5,000 years. You de-encode it and you can listen to it. It sounds perfect. And it means that all the Montreux Jazz Archive, which is 11,000 hours of video, fits inside a grain of sand. All the data of the world would fit inside a single suitcase. So it's like this radical shift in how we can understand our current dilemma with archiving and the sustainability of all of these systems. Still very expensive to do it. The 5,000 years is not tested, but yeah, it's certainly a very interesting space to be working in, because I know it's a vexing issue for most archives, how you deal with that. And then again, if you want to recreate a work, which is a very specific aesthetic interactive conjunction, description and really simple mediums of archive are the best to do that. Yeah, so when you say what's important to remember or record rather than make a complete copy, so I'm big in digital twins, but when you talk about an interactive work, you're really talking about the intention of the creator in how people will engage with that work, which is so critical, right? How it unfolds, how the software experience will work for the visitor, what's their aesthetic and interactive experience, what's the participatory experience. These kinds of parameters become really, really important to describe in great detail, actually. If you read good texts on media art works, because they get described well, you will find these quite precise descriptions about what's going on in them.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we can end. But before, I want to thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation and for explaining so clearly all the potential and possibilities of computational museology. And also thank you all for joining us and participating in this lecture.
Fantastic. Great to see so many nice people online. It's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. And just to keep update with all archives upcoming events, you can just follow us on Instagram or check out our website. Thank you again.
Okay.
And hope to see you soon.
Yes, absolutely. Bye. Bye-bye.